All right. Hi. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Data is Love. I'm really excited to have this conversation with my new friend and colleague, Meenakshi Das. Meena and I met through LinkedIn, and we met through her really incredible newsletter called Data Uncollected, which I want to invite all of you to subscribe to because it's so amazing. And we're going to have a conversation today about breaking algorithmic behaviors in nonprofit philanthropy spaces and how we do better, right? Really excited to have you. Meena, will you introduce yourself and just tell us how you got to this point? Because I've heard about your journey from like being in India to being stateside, working in tech, and now doing this incredible work with nonprofits. But I want others to know it as well.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Aparna. Ever since you started this Data is Love, I have been following it and like secretly hoping, can I be in there? Even though this is my first time doing a LinkedIn Live, but I still wanted to be here. So thank you for having me. I would love to share my journey. That's how I usually start all my conversations. But to give a quick intro to what I do, I have a practice called Namaste Data, and through which I do consulting, and I also do training and workshops through a school called Data is for Everyone. My work through consulting involves helping nonprofits with donor engagement or any form of engagement with their constituents. And the workshopping side of things involves around advancing equity through data, whether it's for machine learning, whether it's for AI, whether it's for just the data and research and different things. And between that consulting and training, I write, which is where Data Uncollected comes. When I don't have the clients to actually test out all these crazy wacky ideas I have, and I want to write it down and share it with the world and bring the world with me in it. And that's where, when you said I read it, every time I hear it I want to record it. And this is a good thing you said it. No, this is recording. I'm going to take that piece and keep it with me. But about my journey, I would say I moved here. So I'm a first generation immigrant from India. I moved here about 6 years ago. I moved to the States first. So back in India, that's where I fell in love with philanthropy. So about 10, 12 years ago, after I had completed my bachelor's and master's, all in tech. So I come from this tech background. A lot of it is around computers, data science. So about 12 years ago, when I completed all of that, and as I was getting into the tech jobs, I also had a school for sexual assault victims and ex-prisoners. And this was through my college where I used to study, and we created this school to help them feel, just come back to from where they have been and through the traumas they have been. And my job was to help them look through computers a different new world. At some point I realized my school doesn't have enough funds and I needed to move to the States to learn, earn more, and bring it back. I still have that dream, and I moved to the States. And I moved to Florida, which is weird because I have this huge phobia for lizards and crocodiles. I don't know how I did. I made amazing friends, completed my education, especially now focused on analytics and machine learning, and moved to Seattle, but still a tech job. And a few months into the job, I met an accident, lost a couple of my teeth, couldn't speak for a few months. It was a legal battle between, with everything going, it was tough. But at that point, I realized I really want to show up more for immigrant rights and refugee rights and advocacy on those issues. And that's when I took a step back from all my jobs in the tech world and entered this nonprofit consulting world in North America. And I started to show up in different spaces as a volunteer, as in my job as a consultant. And it took me about a few years in those jobs until I realized I want to see myself represented in the data. The way I speak, the way I look, I don't see that as often. And I want to ground everything that I do with data, starting with the place of equity and inclusion in it. And so I took a step back from all the jobs up until now and got into this entrepreneurship journey. It's a fun ride so far. I'm completing a year next month. So Yeah.
Congratulations. Happy anniversary of starting this entrepreneurship journey. I think that you and I really connected. Like you're entering the nonprofit world and I left the nonprofit world. That's, it was my home for 10 years. And we don't hear of people talking about grounding everything in data. We don't hear the words machine learning, analytics, and equity in the same sentence in the nonprofit world. And so I want to kick off the conversation with asking you, what the heck are algorithmic behaviors? What do these behaviors look like? What are we doing? Do we know if we're doing it or do we not know?
Well, this was a term when I created these editions, and I started to talk about this in my newsletter, and I created it in two editions. So one, I wanted to focus on the non-profit side of these algorithmic behaviors, and one on the nonprofit side of things. The way I describe it, and I'm sure there's a better lingo out there in the world. The way I describe it is when we have this intended or unintended behaviors coming out of anything that the algorithm provides the output of. So,
Mm-hmm.
for example, if the algorithm provides output based on three values, let's say A, B, and C, and it gives some form of a segmentation list at the end, my behavior is going to be automatically always collect good data points for A, B, and C continuously. So I can always track on that part of the algorithm. That to me is an algorithmic behavior because I'm now knowing or unknowingly more intended towards focusing on that side of things as opposed to actually looking, could there be a data point D? Could there be a data point E that might as well also be used? And I also realize when I write these things in the newsletter, I'm often talking to people who are coming from different areas. So I'm coming from this place of where I have worked on the algorithms directly, and I'm more focusing on the people side of things and not necessarily getting on the hands-on side of things. So when we say algorithmic behaviors and what does that look like, it also goes back to who is being asked the question and who is answering that question.
Will you give us an example of an algorithmic behavior, just kind of like in our day to day life, so we have maybe a common starting
Yeah,
point?
yeah, of course. No, um, I'll give two examples where I feel like where this issue really came up to my head. One was using these gallery tracking apps, for example. Now I have tried different ones. They have never really worked, but that's a different data is love conversation.
That's right. Same, same.
But I have tried at least two or three of them. And the issue I have is most of the time is you get on an app and you start tracking maybe a day or two, and immediately within, I would say, like within the end of the third or fourth day, I would see like, oh hey Nina, here's a leadership board and you are ranking here, do these steps, get here, here's a badge for you because you are, as opposed to this person on the leadership board, you are doing this. It's either trying to push me to feel better or to feel bad by comparing and putting me on my name on the leadership board. My issue with that is that this lack of transparency. I don't know the other folks who are showing up on that random leadership board. There could be someone like someone from my family, someone from my mom, who I have forced to put a health tracking app or calorie tracking app on her phone, but she doesn't necessarily use it,
Mhm.
or she has used it once, and she's is on that list somewhere. Am I actually comparing apples to oranges to feel better or feel bad? Why is there that lack of transparency? So that's one of my issues when I don't see enough clarity, but I am being forced to pick up a habit to align with what it needs to do. The other example from where I actually wrote the first part of this issue, the non-nonprofit side of things, was a few days ago. Instagram showed up this little what would I would say, this little what are the filters on crying filter. So you can use your photo and then put a crying filter on it, and you would cry, and that kind of guarantees this is the next big thing coming up. And I was bothered by it. Like, first of all these social media, if it's giving like just 10 seconds, give your whole story, and move to the next. And then on the top of it, we are adding these filters that are necessarily taking us away from this human empathetic side of things. It was bothering me that why are we choosing to pick these behaviors? So those were coming from those side of those things of these algorithmic behaviors.
Oh, the crying filter I haven't seen, and what the heck? Like, why do we need that? But as you're talking about the calorie tracker, one of the things that strikes me with a lot of these apps, the badging is based on you doing something, not you achieving an outcome,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Definitely.
go ahead.
I was going to say, like, most of these systems that we have, the algorithms, when we think of algorithms, I think that the missing pieces, and this is, I feel like often show up with the missing pieces conversation. I do like algorithms. I have to start there. I do
Yeah.
work on them. They do have value, but the thing is that the missing piece in algorithms is that, one, it often resorts to this scoring versus segmentation kind of thing. Two, it lacks transparency, and three, we don't have enough collective knowledge or power to challenge these systems, on an ongoing basis. And that's the problem with these algorithms. And we need to solve each of them independently. It's not like one thing at a time. And I'm probably jumping the guns here in sharing these things, but it really gets me excited when I talk about these things. One of the things that I read today morning was, and I should have probably shared the link. I'll share it with, right after this conversation. There's an algorithm that MIT is, so it was published on the MIT website. There is an algorithm in medical science which is looking at your X-rays and then predicting accurately your race and ethnicity. It's predicting it. Now, we live in a world where that kind of power exists with the algorithms.
Mhm.
And we are having this conversation about what does that mean? Because there is so much to unpack from that one sentence. And based on all those three things, that scoring segmentation, that lack of transparency, that lack of power, or the lack of collective knowledge to challenge when we need to. We
Yeah.
should accept, but we should also challenge when we need to.
That's wild. I mean, I think of the use of technology, right? Like the AI that predicts a patient's race from an X-ray, right? In the wrong hands and without training,
Yeah.
I mean, that sounds like a disaster waiting to happen, right? Because we know that on the basis of race, people get rather poor care, right? We know that Black women, for instance, are denied painkillers more often than like women of any other race because physicians believe they can tolerate more pain when that's not grounded in reality. All right, that's really scary. And I feel like we can talk about how scary that is for the rest of our time together. But I want to shift into talking about what do algorithmic behaviors look like in nonprofits? And, I'm also thinking about like what are the harms of those behaviors?
That's a great question. I would say, in nonprofits, as with any algorithmic behavior like that we were talking about, it's the same thing as unintentionally trying to focus too much on things that makes the algorithms happy. That's
Mm,
our behavior. So if it's about collecting the good data points around those five things that the algorithm said would give you your major gift donors, I'm giving an example, And then all of a sudden, the whole organization focuses, okay, make sure those 5 data points we are collecting it right, because we want to make our algorithm happy. So it can give us the right names and the better names on the kind of people we need to go out for major gifts.
Yeah.
That's the kind of an algorithmic behavior. And the thing that would that the challenge here is that we would be, one, missing out on people, definitely,
Hmm.
who are also good prospects. We are unintentionally narrowing down the definition of philanthropy, because obviously when the data keeps bringing back the same kind of profiles again and again and again, our understanding of philanthropy would be, okay, this is the kind of thing where we need to go and ask for the gift. So that's the second. And third, I feel like this perpetuates some form of tokenism, when it creates this understanding that, okay, these are the kind of folks who can give, and these are the kind of folks who won't be able to give. That just perpetuates these assumptions, these that they have been made over the years, and that's the harm that can happen if we don't keep these algorithmic behaviors in check.
Yeah, I think major gifts is such an interesting space. And I remember that one of your newsletters, like it was early on that I read, and we hadn't really met yet. And it was on major gifts, right? It was in thinking about how you qualify a donor that's the right fit for your organization. And I think more recently, and especially the last couple of weeks, as we've been watching the stock market, especially tech stocks, take a hit. I've also been thinking about, like net worth versus liquidity, and a lot of nonprofit organizations really chasing a donor that shows up on lists of people with really high net worth, not always understanding that that doesn't mean that they have like cash on hand or that they're going to write you a check. And I know that, of course, people make donations of stock and crypto and all of those things, but the majority of those gifts are cash based. And if someone's not very liquid, they're not going to write you a check regardless of what their net worth shows up on some platform dashboard situation, right?
No, absolutely. I would bring an example from a recent conversation I had. Was use So I was talking to this individual after my workshop on advancing equitable data, and this individual belongs to a theater organization based out of Seattle, and we were talking about his portfolio, and we were talking about, okay, what are we doing to listen to the donors that are in the portfolio, and we are ensuring that it's grounded in equity and inclusion, and we're doing that conversation. And he mentioned that in the wealth screening, the names that were coming up, the portfolio for the capacities, there were 2 individuals whose capacities were lower than they were than the last wealth screening, which was within the
Mhm.
last few years.
Yeah.
But their gift that they had actually made was larger than the largest gift made pre-pandemic. So they had made a gift which was larger than their largest gift with pre-pandemic, but even though their well screening capacity ranges were coming up lower,
Yeah.
and there is right there an example. If we would have just gone with what your well screening says, we would miss out on an opportunity of engaging someone who is clearly trying to reach out in more ways than one right now, as we are, in the some form of pandemic, to engage with this
Mhm.
organization. And so we need to be really mindful of what we are relying on, what we are trying to align with in our data and in our algorithms. As much as I love to see us to be data driven, we need to be just as much mindful of where is that coming from? What are we doing about it? The what, the
Mhm.
why, the who, the when, all of those things matter.
Yeah, that's wild. And so I'm curious, like, how did this client of yours in the theater organization wrap their heads around the discrepancy between the wealth screening data and like the actual gift?
I mean, I would say it was pretty commendable. One, that they observed it, they acknowledged
Yeah.
it, and they were not trying to say, okay, this is a one off event. I'm probably just still going to go with how well screening is. So they were willing, as a team, as an organization, to slow down and kind of understand, to unpack what's happening here. I want to know more. I want to, and probably that's where our conversation is coming from. Like, what do we do now when I'm seeing these two folks coming up here?
Hmm.
And one of the things that we decided at this moment of time is to not to rely solely on your capacity while screening information, especially when they are not in any kind of a capital campaign or anything like that. Nothing like that. So it doesn't need that. I wouldn't call it fake urgency, but I would call it doesn't need that urgency where you have
Yeah.
to focus on one side of the things. And so they were willing to take a step back and send out a survey to hear back from their folks. Okay, given a list of things where if you want to make a philanthropic gift, where would you want to give? They want to prioritize that as opposed to the well screening results just right away. The other thing they were willing to acknowledge is the forms of philanthropy differs culture to culture. Some cultures prefer to give in-kind gifts and direct cash donations and show up in a different ways as opposed to other cultures. So they wanted to explore these nuances even with the cultural differences,
Yeah.
not from the way of like, okay, tell me you are South Asian woman, so I'll cross tab it against your motivations in the survey only. They were trying to create an intentional space to hear from the folks directly, as opposed to the things they were getting segmented, curated lists.
Just hearing you say, crosstab and South Asian women, it just has me thinking about like who are the people that are designing the algos? What data are they feeding it versus the ground reality of nonprofits and philanthropy?
No, I would say, the whole cycle, and I often try to unpack it or, take a piece of it in my newsletters. The whole cycle is you decide a cycle of, let's say, how algorithms are created. Someone decides a problem exists. They find out data about that problem. Either it exists, the data, either it exists or you
Mm,
collect it. Then, after you have collected the data, you have a problem definition, you create an objective function, and you decide which algorithms out of a range of algorithms you need to produce this model or thing that you're trying to create. Based on that, you're going to get some outcomes and you're going to create some reports, some insights that would be
mhm.
given to some folks who funded that research or question, and they would be taking some decisions and actions. It's a whole pipeline. And every step of the way has the responsibility of thinking about it from equity and inclusion point of view. And we are missing it on every of those. So what problems are being picked, who is it being solved for, what data is being picked, the algorithms, the narratives, the context, the whole spectrum.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah, I mean, I also, like you, love the world of data and analytics, and it's not where I was formally trained. And I think about just constantly. And earlier this year, we had a guest named Sadie St. Lawrence, who's the founder of Women in Data, and she went into this line of work because she was like, there are too few women, and if they're not there designing the algos, then our world, like then the algo doesn't respond to the needs of women, right? In particular, but also other, historically underrepresented groups. Um, but I want to, okay, let's come back to the nonprofit world. One of the things that I hear people say a lot, and it was in part what pushed me out of nonprofit work, is people would say to me, hey, look, I came to this work, I came to this organization because I'm really passionate about kids, I'm really passionate about education, I'm really passionate about something, right? I'm not here for math, I'm not here for numbers, don't make me look at pivot tables and spreadsheets. And it was pretty disheartening. So at 30, I said, okay, well, like I don't want to be here. Um, but I think that the conversation has shifted to people seeing the importance of data and evidence and data informed approaches. What do you think is the responsibility of leaders in nonprofit education, nonprofit organizations specifically around educating their employees and upskilling their employees in this line of work?
Two things that comes to my mind that I think I have often also referred in some of my newsletters. One is the leaders have to get continuously uncomfortable with these kind of conversations. There is no easy way. There is no band-aid solutions. There is no um, read one thing and be done with it kind of an approach. So you have to be
Mm-hmm.
continuously uncomfortable, showing up in spaces for your own learning and then taking back something from there to your employees. And the second thing is co-designing with the community. I use those words pretty frequently because I have seen it translated into ways which is not super meaningful. So if you have, made all the decisions on something, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then you have made decisions, okay, I'm going to use this algorithm. I'm going to use it in this way for this segmentation for so and so reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Done. And then you send it out, let's say to four folks you decide, let's, to call them as the community, representatives of community, and you send them out to. And then you say,
Mm-hmm.
hey, can you share any thoughts you have on this so and so and so things that we have decided? Well, by that point, you have already taken, used your leverage, your power to just make the decisions that are going to be needed for the project. And you are sort of asking for feedback at the end. That is not really co designing. Co designing means the power is shared for all the stakeholders who matter in the conversation right from the start as things are being designed up until the end, and not really being just given a document to say, can you now comment on the feedback? So the two things that leaders can do is invest in their own education, be uncomfortable, and two, co-design with the community right from the start. And probably the next uncomfortable question from there would be, who is my community? And that's a good question,
Mm.
but it needs to start from somewhere. And this is where I recommend starting from.
Oh, I love this. Yeah. I mean, co-designing with the community is so important. And I would, also say that a lot of people in movement spaces, in policy and advocacy spaces, they would say that proximity to the community is everything. If you are not proximate to the people that you're trying to solve for, then you're not going to be able to solve that problem, like end of story. And I think that we see that in like big and little ways, right? Like we're still dealing with a lot of the same education challenges that we were 10 years ago and 20 years ago, right? Like they remain with us. Or solving global health issues or sanitation issues or access to clean water issues. A lot of these problems remain unsolved because it's not the amount of money that we're pouring in, it's the lack of the co-design with community. It also makes me think of, I think when people think of algorithms, they think of like high tech,
Mhm.
right? But it doesn't have to be,
No,
right?
it,
So, yeah,
I was gonna say it really doesn't have to be like. But can I actually share about a cool project which I'm probably going to talk
yes,
about in the newsletter anyway? So
yes.
I'm doing this project on understanding the social gaps in the data points for immigrants who immigrated here, way back in the 70s, and then between the first generation, second generation, third generation, like the multi-generational immigrants. And I'm trying to understand the gaps in the
Hmm.
social needs from
Yeah.
the data point of view. What data points should have been collected for them? And it's an ongoing research for one of my clients. And an interesting thing that I am observing is that, I'm a first generation immigrant who immigrated about 6 years ago out of India. And then there
Hmm.
are folks who moved way back in the 70s and 80s. There are a lot of places where the social needs, the challenges that I faced
Yeah.
versus they faced, it intersects. And
Hmm.
there are commonalities. And I question, why are there those commonalities? Like, any immigrant who moves from one country to another is going to face some challenges. That is not a question. That's a given thing. It's a change in the environment. But why
Hmm.
are but those challenges should be different. I should
Yeah.
have different challenges the one who moved here 30 years ago as opposed to 50 years ago. versus who will going to immigrate in the next 20 years. He or she or the person shouldn't have the same challenges as me, the social
Yeah.
me. And so, if there is still some commonalities in the way I had challenges as opposed to the people I'm interviewing, the question is then where does those missing data points show up? What is missing then, and where should be plugged into so that
Yeah.
the same challenges doesn't repeat? We must have different challenges. That's the indicator of growth, to have different challenges. If we're having the same ones, we're probably not moving forward.
Oh, if we're having the same ones, we're not moving forward. I'm just gonna put that on a t-shirt and we're gonna wear that t-shirt when we do this again in a couple of months. Um, I know that we're at time and you've been talking a lot about, I mean, essentially in a nutshell, like how data literacy can have better impact, right? Like this is a core skill set that we need, especially those of us that are in social impact spaces to have impact that's positive, right? That's net positive. Um, what what do you want people to do when they leave this conversation, right? Like, what are one or two things that they can do right away if they want to improve their data literacy? They don't have to sign up for like an AI boot camp,
No.
right? Like, in fact, you're probably like, there's no need for them to do that. So, what should they be doing?
I am going to probably write it in the LinkedIn post as well. So I might as well.
So everybody has to follow me now to get like the really good information.
I would say probably do something, and I got into this whole entrepreneurship thing to humanize these aspects of the
Mhm.
things we are talking. So I'm going to give an example of something that I did in my kitchen. And give an example. So I'm not a
Yeah.
cook, and I don't know cooking, but I am fortunate to have family members who know cooking and who have been feeding me over the years. But up until recently, there was a need for me to go into the kitchen and actually start, not just raid the fridge, which is my primary role, but
Mhm.
actually start cooking.
Yeah.
And the first day I was into it, it was not a few days ago. It was coming out of a need in my family where I had to cook. It was, not as common. I knew some things, but not everything, which is meal worthy enough in my family.
Mhm.
And now this first day, I'm standing in the kitchen and I'm thinking, okay, I have seen my mom do these and these and these things. I have seen folks do these and these things. I've seen some cooking shows. Where do I start to ensure that everything is balanced and I'm learning? I remember it's been about a few more than a few weeks now. My first week was all about exploring everything that I have in the kitchen. So I started with different settings. So I have this air fryer. So I started to play with different settings. I have this cook pot. I started to play with the different settings and see what
Mhm.
works and what doesn't.
Yeah.
I tried on different vegetables. Some the things that we usually eat. Some of them
Mhm.
were okay. Some of them were not. This is where you start with the data too. Whatever you have right now, access to the tools, start playing with it. Try to see what's working on it. How does it look like? What does it mean? Build that curiosity. And if you don't feel like you don't have it, which is I'm sure you have, but if you feel like you're missing on it, go and log into
Mhm.
every space that you have in from the tech point of view, any product that you have. Log in into it and see what does it look like? What can you do with it? What can you build on it? As you improve on your curiosity, you would start seeing, okay, what does this mean? Why do I have it? We don't get to the why straight for any new thing. We start need to build a curiosity with the what and how, and then we get to the why and how to improve it. So build on that curiosity as a step one of data literacy, and from there, it's gonna go good.
Oh, I love the analogy of cooking, the idea of experimentation and yeah, like you don't have to produce like a beef Wellington on your first try. Like you could do some scrambled eggs and I think that that's a really good start. I love this. Thank you so much for joining me today. And to anybody, like watching, listening in on this conversation, I cannot recommend her newsletter enough because it is one simple, like 20-minute investment in your week to get data literate, to get a little bit smarter, and to have some super concrete, relevant examples. And like, by the way, like I get a lot from it, even though I'm somebody who works in a similar space, because there's so many different ways of solving these problems. And yeah, and we owe it to ourselves to do better for the communities in which we work. So Mina, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for
We're not
having
going to
me.
be here next week because it's Memorial Day stateside, so we're going to take Monday off. But we'll see you the week after and continue this conversation about data in nonprofits and philanthropy. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Bye.